Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second instalment, if you like, of the Sustainability TV show. We got a really exciting discussion topic this afternoon, which has been exacerbated by hang on. If you like, of this hang on a minute. We've got a little bit of a faux pas here. Yeah, let me just get rid of that. That's another. Do you know what? That happened to me on Saturday as well. And I thought I'll never do that again, and I've just done it again. So so we've got a really exciting show today about energy, which has been brought about by the EU debate, really, which has kind of highlighted if we separate ourselves from Europe, then what does that mean for our energy? Which, of course, much of it comes from elsewhere. So the whole issue of this island being able to support itself is in many aspects. So anyway, that's just one slightly interesting issue that's been brought up lately. So with me today, Debbie, sitting by my side, looking lovely as always.
Thank you.
Looking forward to today's show.
Too right, I am.
Good, yes. Good. And Tim, all the way from Cardiff. Is the sun shining down there?
It is briefly. It's been sort of proper April showers down here. I mean, going from a bit of bright sunshine, then 10 minutes later, it's chucking it down, hailstones. And nothing to do with climate change this time. It's just what it does this time of year.
Yeah, and the grass seems to grow incredibly quickly when the sun's out, the rain's on, the sun's out, the rain's on.
Yeah.
April showers.
Yeah, so, okay, well, tell us then, Tim, because you brought the subject of energy to the table this week. So if you could start us off a little bit about, because you've written a book which is all about, well, all sorts of things.
Got my other one.
Oh, is this another book now?
This came out before The Consciousness of Sheep. This is called Britain's Coming Energy Crisis.
Right, okay.
At the time I wrote it, hardly anybody was talking about this, but it's sort of entered the mainstream now that people are really starting to panic about, are we going to get through winters without the electricity going off?
Well, that's that. I mean, that's we would have the TV, this TV going off if we didn't have any electricity being supplied to us, which of course is. I mean, and I'm old enough to remember the blackouts of I don't know, was it the 70s?
Yeah, early 70s.
When the 3-day pilots were on strike, Arthur Scargill and his gang.
Yeah.
And that's a real prospect we've got to look forward to, is it not?
I think it's worse. One of the points with the 1971, when they brought in the 3-day week and all of that, was, I mean, if you go back to a house that was operating in those days, it was unusual to have a power point and like a plug socket in a room. I mean, commonly you'd have a plug socket in the living room. You'd probably have a couple in the kitchen, but that was about it, because people didn't have that much stuff that they plugged in. You go into a modern house and every room's got 3 or 4 plug sockets. Yeah, and even then we use extension cables. So that's a measure of how much we're reliant on electricity now compared to how we were then.
Yeah, but it's not even just that, is it? I mean, I know electricians now who are wiring up smart houses, and it's not about having a plug point, it's the whole house. It's wired into this energy supply.
Yes, I mean, the problem is we've built ourselves a whole suite of technologies that depend upon electricity to keep going. And in a way, it's not just that they depend on electricity, they depend on a constant sort of regular supply. So you don't want surges of power either. So, okay, at the moment, the grid is doing that and that's fine. But every winter for the last 3 winters, they've put out a warning saying that the amount of capacity in the system is shrinking. So there's a sort of margin between what we generate and what we use. That's getting smaller and smaller every year. It's predicted to go negative next winter. Now, up until now, we've got away with it because we've had these incredibly mild winters. Actually, I wonder what would have happened this winter had we had, say, 2 weeks of snow and ice, where people would have been stuck indoors. We'd have had everything switched on full blast. Now, the way they deal with it is it's industry and business that cops it first. So they've got to set up so they don't want to disconnect ordinary households. But then if your business relies on a steady supply of electricity and they turn it off, actually intermittently, it's the worst of all worlds. I mean, if they tell you like Heath did in the 3-day week, they kind of told everyone, right, Monday where everything's closed, so we could all plan around right, Monday the electric's off. What's more likely to happen now is that it'll just go off. So you'll be halfway around the supermarket doing your weekly shop, and suddenly the tills don't work. You can't pay on your card. So you have to leave the shopping behind. All of the freezers go off, so they've got to throw it all out.
You can leave the shopping behind.
Well, you can take it with you. And
so Debbie, let's bring you in. What's your view on this?
Well, it's obviously, as Tim's saying, we've got a big problem coming that most of us seem to be totally ignorant of or choose to stay blind to. I know that quite a number of people that can afford to do so have been putting up their own sort of supplies, insofar as they've been putting solar panels on the roofs or maybe heat pumps in the garden. I noticed when I went to the Isle of Wight the other weekend, huge numbers of houses. I was really quite impressed, actually. Something like, I'd probably guess about 5 or 10% of the houses seem to be setting themselves up. But most of those are set up so that power is generated, comes through the house and then goes to the grid. But what happens when there isn't enough coming through from your own system, because perhaps there isn't daylight or there isn't the warmth, and we expect to collect it back from the grid? And what's happening to it when it goes in?
I think it's even worse than that, because a lot of the systems that we have installed now depend on electricity coming in from the grid to work. So there's actually a trip switch in most solar systems that will cut the system out if the grid goes down. So you'd have thought the one thing that having solar panels would be really good for is if you had a power cut, you'd still be able to work some things. But actually everything goes out when the grid goes out. So it is a real problem for people. There isn't an easy way around it.
So let's just, I'm a regular guy, I to be honest, if someone says to me, there's going to be no electricity, I've got a couple of choices. I can get a few candles. I can choose to ignore it because it seems a bit science fiction. We're not going to have electricity. What, today, in today's world, with all this, surely that they would never, would never let us get into that situation. I can't believe what you're telling me. So, right, lay it on the line. Why is it that we have a problem? Because I suspect 99% of the people out there wandering around in the street think you're in cloud cuckoo land.
We have two problems, and they both come together to produce this. So the one is about the capacity to generate energy. So basically, in order to keep prices down for the last 30 or 40 years, the companies that supply electricity haven't been invested in new power stations. Essentially, if you're making money day to day, you want to really work the assets that you've got. You don't want to spend on new ones.
And then you're talking about coal-fired energy.
No, all of it. So, we're now having to extend the lives of nuclear power plants beyond their predicted lifetime because we haven't got anything else in place. The government claims that it's going to build 20 or so new gas-fired power stations. There was a report out a couple of weeks back from the Institute of Mechanical Engineers saying you haven't got the skilled workforce to do it. You'd have to take every mechanical engineer that the country needs for everything else to get them building these gas things. So that isn't going to happen. We might build one or two, but we're not going to have the 20 they claim they need. Similar thing with the Hinkley Point nuclear power station. The big, enormous thing. There are claims it's going to be the most expensive structure on Earth when it's finished.
Where's that one?
This is in Hinkley Point in North Somerset. It's actually just across the sea from where I'm sat.
Right, okay.
Now, it's claimed it'll produce about 7% of the UK's energy needs. The problem with it is the design itself appears to be flawed. There are two other similar ones, one in Finland, one in Normandy, and they're both on hold because when they started building them, they realized that there were problems with them. So that's going to cause a delay. It's also so hugely expensive that, to be honest, only an idiot will put money into it because you're dependent on the money that you're going to make when you start selling the electricity.
We've got plenty of idiots.
Well, we insist on electing idiots every 5 years. This is successive governments. It isn't just the current lot, although they're no better than any of the rest of them, probably a bit worse. But essentially, governments for the last 30 odd years have been saying, well, we'll leave it to somebody else to deal with capacity. As long as we can keep energy prices down so the voters are happy, we won't mention it. So that's one half of the problem, is we don't have the generating capacity in this country to meet the need. Add into that, okay, climate change targets, we're closing the coal-fired ones quite reasonably. We don't particularly want oil-fired power stations, and we're not replacing those with the kind of renewables that we need to. So that's the generating capacity side. The other side of it is we're actually running out of fuel. Both the North Sea gas and North Sea oil peaked in 1999. We're now producing about a third of the oil and gas that we were back at the turn of the century. When oil fields deplete, they tend to drop like a stone. So you build up production gradually over decades. You reach the peak point and suddenly it just drops away, and no matter how much money and investment goes in, you cannot get the production back up. So that's where the North Sea is. I mean, it was a one-off gift, possibly a curse. We had the opportunity to do like Norway has done famously and invest that money in our future. Instead, we blew it. We partied through the late 80s and the 90s, had a good time, all enjoyed really high house prices, all thought we were getting better off, and it's all over. The best the government is offering to us is that we can import from places like Libya. Possibly we can do a deal with ISIL or somebody to get some of their oil. Those are the kind of places we're now having to import from. And we're becoming increasingly dependent on those parts of the world that are incredibly dodgy places. We depend for gas on Russia, and we're not really friendly with Russia. I mean, Mr. Putin doesn't like us very much since we started sanctioning him. So come a nice cold European winter where he's got a choice between warming Russian houses or selling gas to us, I think we could be shivering out in the cold. So the other side of it then is government's got this pipe dream about fracking. The important point to bear in mind with fracking is not a single unit of profitable gas has come out of Europe. They've tried it in Poland, they've tried it in Denmark, they've tried it in the Baltic states. They're all places that have even more of an interest in fracking succeeding than we have. So they went out and positively wanted to encourage that industry. And the industry drilled the test wells, did all of the kind of testing, came back and said, no, can't be done. Basically the geology is wrong. The gas deposits are spread too far apart. As with this country, a lot of them are under built up areas, so you can't do it anyway. And yet this government has bet our energy future on getting enough gas from underneath Britain to actually fuel the 20 power stations that it claims it's going to build. So that's our two sides of the problem. On the one hand, you have this diminishing supply. And globally, oil and gas supplies are depleting. It's getting harder and harder to access them. So what we're seeing is, oil and gas always used to do this, where you'd get a period where prices would go up. That would cause people to invest in drilling and exploration. As that came online, that would bring prices down. That would last for a while until demand picked up. Then prices would start to rise again. That would give the incentive to go out and find the next lot. What we're now seeing is that process actually becoming incredibly volatile. So we're going from record-breaking high prices down to record-breaking low prices and back. Now the thinking is in the oil industry, certainly, that because it's a struggle to get oil and gas out of the ground, basically not only are we having to put more into the exploration and the drilling, but actually prices have to stay high for anyone to make any money out of it.
So what would you suggest then to an individual if they're in the position to be able to afford to do things for themselves? How would you suggest that they improve their own potential?
I would advise anyone that can afford to get solar panels, but it's a big investment. You're looking at the best part of £10,000 to get a roof load of solar panels. Now the government schemes have come to an end with the subsidies and stuff. You're not going to get much back from the grid to cover them. So if you had to make your money back solely on the energy you're saving, the current systems are probably not that cost effective, because you'd be looking 10, 15 years from now before you recovered your investment. I'd have said, actually, and it's what I'm doing, is buy yourself some sweaters.
I mean, one of the things that struck me is that, you know, we're on at the moment. We're on a laptop. You're on a laptop. We're communicating over. We've got internet. We've got stuff going on here. Now, is there any way that could be serviced through generating your own electricity in some way?
Not really. The problem we have is that most of the energy use that we're currently using doing this is actually taking place in the data center where all of this is happening, not here.
But presuming the data center is still up, presuming.
Yeah. Okay. Fingers crossed. Google are a bit more far-sighted than our government.
Yeah. Maybe the same data center that's firing the cash dispensers. You know, like we need to know that they're still functioning or something. Maybe they're not, but you know what I mean. That's a whole different discussion for a different week. But like, if I wanted to recharge my phone,
right,
I could do that with a solar panel.
Yeah, you could do that now. I mean, there's my colleague Julia, her husband keeps a solar panel pointed out the window on a sunny day and has all of his rechargeable batteries in there charging away. We can all do that. The solar cells are dirt cheap. I mean, you could make your own panel for a couple of quid. I mean, the solar cells themselves you can buy on eBay. You're talking about a couple of quid at most. Little aluminium frame to turn it into a panel, sheet of glass over the top, and a bit of soldering, and you've got yourself a solar panel. So in that sense, yes, that's doable. If you're working on a laptop that runs on a 12-volt DC, then you're in a better place than I am with a desktop PC, because you can actually run the laptop straight off the battery. So essentially you've got DC current coming in off the roof, and that's then going direct to your laptop. That's fine.
There's a guy called Carl Hughes who we must get on as a guest, because he's actually done a video of how to build yourself a solar panel. Yeah. He's gone along to one of these electrical places and bought a solar panel and a energy converter and a this and a that. But he basically sits there and plugs it all together and sticks his solar panel out the window or whatever, and happily running his laptop.
Yeah, I mean, it's doable if you get if you can get an array of car batteries and you have somewhere to store them that isn't going to gas you, then actually linking up so that you're charging those batteries and using those as a storage works. They're actually a more cost-effective storage at the moment than these Tesla batteries that everyone's touting.
My dad was telling me that he's been out in a remote part of Australia where somebody has set it up, and they've got a field full of solar panels, obviously a lucky person with some space, and they've put up a huge big battery bank, which are all 2-volt batteries, big lead acid old style batteries, in order to be able to make sure that they've got the storage capacity to keep the power coming through, to be able to put it back into the house when it's not there during the evening and nighttime.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually probably some other countries, I mean, I see a lot of stuff from America where people do similar things. I think because they're less regulated than we are, it's a lot easier to do that. I hear it's all very kind of tightly regulated. I mean, you can't just get hold of the sulfuric acid that powers those batteries. I know the grid people dislike anything that might connect in with the grid. So you'd have to have it entirely off-grid.
Yes.
So again, I mean, it's doable, but I mean, if you can do it yourself, yes, that brings the price right down. If you are dependent on somebody else building it for you, that's going to probably be beyond most people. The other one that you can do that's incredibly environmentally unfriendly is get a generator. Again, it's not something I'd want to recommend because of its impact on the environment, but I mean, if you're running a business that depends on electricity running through and you've got to have it on, then now might be a good time to think about investing in a generator before demand picks up.
What about the hydrogen or systems? Is that something that an individual could put in place?
I don't know that an individual would do it at this point. I mean, a small business might do. There are systems over in America that they've developed where basically you use solar power and wind power to electrolyze water to get the hydrogen. then you have a bank of hydrogen cells to generate the electricity from. It's a good way of storing energy. I doubt very much whether we're going to be running our transport system on hydrogen, but it is a really good way of, or a good alternative to batteries, though.
For a household, you mean?
Yeah, and again, there isn't at the moment the kind of critical mass that you need to bring the prices down. So in a way, the more people sort of went into hydrogen cells, the cheaper they're going to become. But at the moment, again, it's an expensive option. I mean, I've seen businesses running with them where you have something that looks about the size of a lorry container, and that'll do your electrolysizing and kind of store your energy and then produce your energy when you want it.
But quite a big chunk of space required.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something you're going to put in your average 2-bedroom flat.
It could be your average 2-bedroom flat. That's what it is. So we've got an issue with producing enough electricity, and a real issue with that coming home to roost in the next 10 years or sooner.
Oh, sooner than that. I mean, my understanding, picking up from what's been going on in Whitehall, is they've been having all sorts of emergency meetings the last couple of weeks because they need a plan B. Actually, the government, I don't think governments think about energy any more than the rest of us do. I mean, we have a blind spot to it. So it's a bit like these studies that find that people don't know where food comes from, that people don't really know where energy comes from. And your big problem with electricity particularly is you can't really store it. So essentially, we have to be generating the electricity we need as we need it. There's no good sort of saying, well, later on tonight when the wind's blowing a bit, we'll be able to have some. If you haven't got it now, then you can't do things. Now, I don't think government ministers particularly ever looked at this stuff. I think they thought their job was just to keep prices down and keep everyone happy. So their energy experts now are starting to say to them, look, you need to do something here. The lights are about to go out. If you think you're unpopular now, you wait and see what people think of you when the power goes off.
So the complication in all of this is really that we haven't got the innate capability to produce enough electricity that we're consuming here in the UK for ourselves.
No.
That's the first problem. The second problem is where we can get that energy from isn't very palatable based on the international relationships that we have right now.
Well, not only that, but a lot of those people are actually using the energy for themselves nowadays. It used to be, there wasn't anybody else in the world outside Europe, America, and Japan. So we could go to Saudi Arabian people living in the desert and say, oh, can we buy your oil, please? Now, when you go to the Saudis and say, can we buy your oil, please? They say, well, yeah, get in the back of the queue behind China and India and Brazil. And we're not interested in you anymore.
But having said that, oil is very cheap at the moment. And there's a whole lot of politics around the cheapness of oil. And, every barrel that's in the ground is dollars left in the bank, as it were. So there's a real desire to get this oil out because it's cash basically, and might as well have it out than leave it there.
Well, the thing is that's driven by financialization, because if you like, the myth is this sort of Saudi America thing where the West is going to be self-sufficient in oil for centuries. What actually happened was when they brought in the 0% interest rates after the crash, people struggled to find anywhere to invest money. As you just couldn't get any money back on it. You were actually losing money once you accounted for inflation. So where people would have gone into the stock market or into company investments, people started casting around, well, where can we get a return? Now, at the time, you had oil and gas prices way up through the roof. So the oil companies started saying, well, look, we'll sell you company bonds, offering you 8, 9, 10% return. So that was actually 10 times what you could have got shoving in a savings account. Mm. So people rushed en masse to say, well, oil prices are through the roof, $140 a barrel, we can't lose. So they basically invested heavily in the fracking companies, developed contracts, which we'll end up hearing about in the same way as we heard about subprime mortgages. They developed a vehicle whereby the people that run the companies are paid bonuses according to how much they get out of the ground. So the idea was we want to get the stuff out of the ground while the price is still $140 and get it sold. The problem with it is they kind of expected the rest of the world to say, all right, you're producing the world's oil, we'll just turn our taps off and go away. Which of course nobody did. So the Saudis sort of said, well, hang on, we're just going to keep doing what we've always done. If you can't compete with us, that's not our problem. Same with the Russians, same with the Iraqis. So everyone has kept their market share. So basically, as a result, we've got this huge oversupply, which has driven prices down to the point that companies are actually losing money. I mean, it now costs you more for the barrel that the oil goes in than it costs for the oil itself. Now, the problem is when you look behind that, I know one of the stories I'd looked at this week, which I'd headed up about being more bad news from the North Sea. The British oil companies drilling in the North Sea have gone from being multi-billion-pound taxpayers, paying billions into the UK Treasury. They're now valued at less than Marks and Spencer's, and they're having to be bailed out. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, what we found last week, there are two stories. Shell has decided to sell up in the North Sea. They're off. There's a company called ConocoPhillips, which is looking to close down one of the big gas pipelines. If they do so, it'll take 10% of Britain's gas capacity offline. Now, I'm assuming that that will be one of the things that they'll end up having to nationalize just to keep it there rather than just let it go. But it tells you how vulnerable we are to this, because the low oil prices are totally burning up our capacity. So essentially, it's what I was saying before about us going through these periods where prices go up, everybody then rushes to invest and drill more, then the price comes plummeting down, then everyone, until demand picks up, everyone bails out.
Presumably, though, Tim, we've got a lifeline there in that these are supplies that if push comes to shove, we could just go get. Because they belong to us, don't they?
Yeah, but it's not easy to go get them.
No.
It takes an awful lot of money to build an oil rig, to kind of anchor it over the right bit of geology out in the sea and drill down and do all of that. So essentially, if you keep what you've got running, you can keep it going. If you let it close, so you lose all of the technology that's drilling the stuff out of the ground, but you also lose the skilled engineers that you need to go get the stuff. So essentially, it's in nobody's interest to close anything. What you need to do is keep it running. Now, there isn't an infinite supply under there. I mean, we've used the best part of the North Sea. And like anything else in life, we do this low-hanging fruit principle. So it's essentially, if you've got an apple tree out in your back garden, you don't start by climbing to the very top branch to get the apple off there. You give the thing a shake and catch what comes down because it's easy. Yeah. So with the North Sea, as with all fields, we went to the biggest, easiest to tap parts first. What we're now doing is having to drill into the much smaller ones where we're not altogether sure how much oil is in there. It might give us another year's supply, but it might only give us another week. And nobody knows at this point. So the problem now is because the returns on investment are so small, the oil companies are looking at that and saying, well, we don't want to take the risk. Because actually, we think there might be another pocket of oil there, but for all we know, we might not be able to recover it. So rather than invest our millions of pounds into drilling that, we'll just leave it there.
So what can we do? Obviously, there's a period now which we're entering into where energy is going to be a really tough gig to fix because, and without a question, the prices are going to go up. But if you haven't got the supply and the demand stays the same, the prices rise. So we're going to have to source oil and gas from where we can get it, which, bearing in mind the politics on the world stage at the moment, that's likely to cause problems. Exiting from the EU would cause further pressures on energy. Bearing all that in mind and the sustainability, which is what this show's all about, of getting people to think more sustainably, we've got a number of avenues, have we not? We've got let's use less. That's the first thing. Let's try and replace some of our consumption with stuff that we can make out of fresh air, i.e. solar, wind, and any other that we can think of, which is not going to be massive, but it could add up to 10% across the piece. But we've got to do other things too, haven't we? Like, what about wind? What about, that fantastic project I saw in Swansea in the Bay, which could fuel the whole of Swansea, I heard. And they're dilly-dallying around as if it's like, I don't know, shall we build a sandcastle or not?
Yeah, I mean, that side of it. So the choices are that the obvious one, which none of us wants to do, is we have to cut back on energy use. But that, I might say yes. I mean, in the long term, we probably have to cut back quite a bit. But there are things that everyone can do now by just simply turning the thermostat down a couple of notches. In the winter, instead of sort of having the central heating on full blast, stick an extra sweater on. And by the way, you save yourself a bit of money doing that as well. So it's not a foolish thing to do.
Yep.
I mean, beyond that, at an individual level, okay, next time you're coming up to buy new electrical goods, get something that's A++ rated. Doesn't cost you any more than the older ones, and you actually save a lot of energy that you're using. All of this benefits your pocket as well. So it's not, I'm not asking anyone to be an idealist. Next time you come to buy a car, look at the sort of fuel consumption on it. Look at the carbon emissions. Because there are plenty of vehicles out there now that have low fuel use. Save yourself a bit of money again. Be a bit realistic about how far you drive. And there's actually at least 1 in 4 of the journeys we make are within a mile. So actually you don't need a big gas guzzling sporty thing, much as us blokes like those. Actually you can get by with a little tiny runaround that does 60, 70 miles to the gallon. So those are practical things that we as individuals can do. In and of itself, that isn't enough. You actually need governments and local authorities and everybody else to be doing stuff as well. We need to build renewable capacity. The lagoon that you talked about in Swansea, there's a very strong tidal race in Swansea Bay. So as the tide comes in, it pushes river water back in, holds it back until the tide drops, then it flows. Essentially, if you can put a barrier across that, put some turbines in, you capture all of that energy as it goes out. In the long term,
don't you?
Well, you get some of it on the way in. I'm not sure you get as much umph out of it on the way in as you get on the way out. The other nice thing about it, unlike wind and solar, is it's predictable. I mean, we can predict tides with kind of pinpoint accuracy. Swansea, it was meant to be an experimental one just to see if it would work. So I think that one puts out about 300 megawatts. They've got plans for a bigger one between Cardiff and Newport that would actually run all of the homes in Wales. I mean, it actually would generate as much as a big coal-fired power station if they can build it. And actually, we'd be far better off putting our money into those than wasting our money on the Hinkley Point nuclear plant. But the politicians don't like these sorts of things because you don't get to cut the ribbon and get photographed for the Prime Minister of China. So yeah, renewables we need to do. What we lack at the moment is the resources to do them quickly. Now, if government chose to, I mean, if we had a global agreement or a European agreement, we could actually subsidize and get a lot more. It'd be a great way of sort of producing employment. So you have a kind of Manhattan project for renewables. Get all of the unemployed people, get them putting panels up, windmills up. The one interesting story that I came across in the week that I think possibly provides a solution to storage. Let's see if I can find what the name of the organization was. It was a German outfit, and they're called the Storing Energy at Sea project. So if you go online and Google storing energy at sea, you'll come across this. The idea is they've got what they call sea eggs.
Yes.
They're 30-meter wide or 30-meter diameter concrete spheres. Their thinking behind it was quite right, is our best way of storing energy at the moment is to use hydro. There's a place up in North Wales where they've got an artificial lake that when they've got plenty of energy, they pump water up into the lake. Then when you meet a peak of demand where you need more capacity, you let the water flow downhill and generate electricity. The problem we have with that is there aren't that many valleys that you can go to and just flood. The people and businesses that are in the valleys tend to not like it very much if you do. Mm-hmm. So, it's been a limited thing that there are only so many artificial lakes you can build. What these guys reckon is each of these spheres, the idea is that they're full of air anchored to the seabed. And when you need energy, you let the water in through a turbine. So, you've got that sudden rush in of energy as the pressures equalize. They reckon each of these spheres will generate 20 megawatts each. So they're talking about a whole, like we deploy the wind turbines out at sea. Their view is you'd sort of have one wind turbine attached to one of these storage things. So they reckon that you're into, let's see if I can find what the figure was. I was getting up for several gigawatts of output. So you're talking about the equivalent of several nuclear plants. What I liked about the idea is it's incredibly low tech.
Well, what happens then? So you let the water in, generates that electricity, and then what?
Right, so when the wind's blowing and you're generating more energy than you need, you use that extra energy to pump the spheres out again.
Okay.
Right, so that's your way of storing the energy then. So each time you get a peak of demand where you need extra energy, you let the water flow into these things. That generates the extra electricity.
So they're sort of one-offs in a way then. Once you filled it, you have to wait till you've got enough energy to empty them again.
Yeah, but I mean, the same principle as using a lake. If you've got enough of them, you can always have some that are ready to go with others that are sort of half full or,
a fair number of reservoirs around the place, but I mean, I'm guessing if you let water go, you also haven't got any drinking water.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we wouldn't use the drinking water infrastructure to do it. Although I'm always interested in why they've never retrofitted some of the water dams that we've got with hydro generators. They wouldn't generate the kind of power that we need to run countries, but they could probably run their own energy from it.
What about things like the canals, which are always running, but they're just for pleasure at the moment?
Again, I mean, you need to keep the water in there, but I don't know how big the drop would be off a lock as to whether it would be worth doing it. There's a project just over the road from me that they've done on the River Taff, over at a place called Raddo, where they've got a weir there. And they've just, it's due to come online in a couple of months' time, where they've built a sort of hydroelectric turbine on the side of the weir. So as long as we don't get a really bad drought, that will always be able to produce electricity. Again, it's another one of these that does a couple of hundred houses rather than a big project.
But still, a couple of hundred houses is better than no houses.
Yeah, and I mean, there are plenty of rivers in Britain and there's plenty of rainwater.
There's plenty of weirs too around from either river to canal or canal to river and the like.
Yeah, I mean, it's always struck me that one of the problems we have in looking at this is everyone looks for the sort of one big technological breakthrough that will save the day. So everyone's looking to things like nuclear fusion or something, where what we do while we're looking at that is we fail to do all of these small things that we could do that would make us a lot less dependent.
Yes, even if they're not complete.
Yeah, so I mean, my view is instead of sort of saying, oh, we have to find the one best way of doing this, I mean, actually lots of people locally doing lots of fairly small scale stuff all actually adds up to a big amount of energy in the end.
Yeah, I mean, like putting a turbine in the water supply pipes, isn't that a good idea as well? And
I don't know, that's just harvesting a bit of the energy that you've already got if your water supply is pumped. I mean, it'd work in this part of the world because it's gravity fed, but there are large swathes of the country where the water has to be pumped to get pressure.
Right.
I mean, I think I'd look to, if you like, the river systems and stuff because it's naturally occurring. So if you've got a weir, chuck a turbine on it. I mean, it's not too obtrusive either looking at the one they've done here. It looks, I don't know if you've seen these salmon runs that they do to get the salmon up over the weirs. So it looks a bit like that, only a bit bigger. But as I said, it doesn't really spoil the area. It's not like having somebody whack a whacking rate power station on there. I mean, it sort of fits in.
There's also the heat generation thing, isn't there? Because I can remember at college, I trained in agriculture. We were talking about the potential for, particularly if you've got a dairy farm or a pig farm or the like, or the livestock anyway, where you've got to generally speaking, you've got to collect all the muck together in a slurry tank or something like. And we were talking about putting heat generating or a pipe through it effectively, because you've got a lot of bacteria working away there, creating loads and loads of heat for you anyway, and it's there permanently, pretty much all year round. And so you could take that heat via, putting a coil through the tank to collect the warmth out of it.
Yeah, and the other thing that you can do with slurry is use it with the anaerobic digestion to produce methane.
Yes.
Which again, then you can use the methane to either for heat or to generate electricity. Because the other thing you get out of it then is all of the nutrients back as fertilizer to put back on the fields.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the shows would be really good, and there must be people out there that we could put onto the show. Is because this strikes me as a very link for growth type thing, which is it's all about everybody doing a little bit each. It's not about a massive solution. There is no massive answer to this. If we can tap into a dying star, perhaps that might give us enough energy for a few billion lifetimes. But it's unlikely we're going to come up with a big answer, because we'd have come up with a big answer already, probably. Or the big answer might kill us all, so we're more likely to, if we can encourage people to do a little bit each and get excited about doing that, because it's got to be, I mean, you do a lot of this sort of self stuff, Debbie, and actually it must be really rewarding when you think, well, this dinner I'm eating, I grew it.
Yes, very much so.
Very
much so.
I grew this dinner, and to be able to put the light on or something and think, I powered that.
I know that certainly there are people out there who have achieved things, and I think that's one of the things we really need to try and get going in this show, is to get a lot more people involved in, so that we can actually get out and showcase some of those ideas. I mean, there's some fantastic ideas out there, particularly on the food front, which I think we ought to have a food show in a way, of how to produce your own soil to grow it in, either using worms or hotbed composting, or all of those waste materials that at the moment we're just throwing away. It's just incredibly wasteful. We're just chucking it out into the council, and the council are whinging because they have to then spend money on picking it up, taking it somewhere else and doing something with it. Whereas, I mean, personally, I never they don't get any food waste from me. It all goes into my compost heap or onto my worms, and then it becomes part of my ground, which is richer for it, and then it becomes food later on for me to eat. And it's a sort of a small scale self-sustaining effort. But we could do that much bigger. A lot more people could get involved. But equally, of course, you have to actually quite like growing in order to bother. But not everybody does. But we all have our passions, and I think if we all did our little bit according to what our own interests are, I think we would gain a great deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are going to be people out there that are quite happy to solder a few panels together, but don't want to get their hands dirty on the allotments.
Yeah, each to their own.
Yeah, absolutely. But they're both vital components of the whole thing. And
as people, we didn't evolve to do everything ourselves. We can only survive as groups of people because we all do different things. So as long as you value what everybody else is doing, then we all make a contribution. It's, okay, kind of. I think in a way, we have to do that individual level stuff, but we also need the community level.
Very much so.
Not least because you've probably got one expert in any given street that actually knows how to do growing food. The rest of us grow weeds. I actually do a good line in producing slugs. I start with one or two at the beginning of the year. By the end of the year, I've got hundreds of them.
What's the slug food for?
I think you need to start frog farming then.
Frog farming, there you go.
I have a couple of frogs in there, but I think there's not enough for the frogs to keep the slugs under control. So I'm going to try this year doing this thing where you put cartons of beer out and see whether they drown themselves in beer.
Salt works, but salt's a lot more effective, I must admit, if you go around in the evening just after the moisture's coming down. Shovel them up. I always think they're great blackbird food.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's always struck me as a bit cruel for putting salt on slugs, but there we are. As well as drowning them in beer seems to be a bit more kind of. At least they enjoy themselves on the way out. Yes, I mean, that level of stuff, I think, once you can pull people together and start to work out whose expertise is where, then you can start to do things. Yeah, one of the great problems that we face with the way we live is that we lack community.
Yes, I think that's very true. We all have our individual skills, and we're probably all doing little bits, not necessary towards sustainability, but we're doing something for our community, hopefully, otherwise we won't be generating any funds, I guess. So it's a matter, as you rightly say, of getting that community really working a lot better. It's starting to happen. It's quite nice to see the transition towns having a real go, but they struggle as well. They try things, and some don't work, and some do, of course, like everything else.
Yeah, of course, if the electricity goes off, if you're a fairly small business, the odds are you're going to be better placed to actually work in cash, which is the one thing that still works on a power cut. Because you have I actually wrote about it in the book about the energy crisis. Is you can have a supermarket that's full of food, you can have a group of customers that all want to buy food, but you're unable to make that transaction if everything depends upon the electricity. Yeah, similar thing with the banks. I mean, it doesn't matter how much money the bank's got behind the counter. If the computers go down, they can't give it to you.
Well, they haven't got much cash behind there, to be fair.
But equally, I mean, if you then decide, okay, I'll pay on a card or something, well, not if the card machine isn't working. So
absolutely.
I mean, I think this is why I say, going back to the threat, the biggest threat that we face is intermittent supply. So in a sense, I mean, it would be easier to go back to what they did in the 70s and mark particular times of the day out and say, well, we'll switch off then. Because at least there's some predictability with that. So you kind of know, oh, right, no point in going to the office that day, or perhaps I'll leave the shopping for another day. Or the problem with intermittency is because it's unpredictable, it means that we actually cannot get on with our lives. I mean, how many people use a supermarket now as the 1 hour of the day when they try to do all of their shopping because they're busy doing other things? Well, if that's your hour and you happen to turn up in the middle of a power cut, what then? So anyone that's got their lives structured so that they're really busy all the time is at risk from intermittency. There are whole industries are, and go back to the computer thing. If you look at the places where they make hard drives for computers, you've got to have a negative atmosphere environment. So it's basically you've got to have pressure inside the building, so it's pushing air out. That's because you daren't get even the slightest fragment of dust in there. It isn't just that if the dust gets in, that breaks the discs that are already being made. It means they've got to sterilize the whole plant again before they can restart production. So something like that needs a constant supply of energy. It daren't have an intermittent supply. Otherwise, it just goes out of business.
Same is true with hospitals. Exactly the same. They can't. That's why they've got generators, of course. But okay, what are we going to talk about next time?
I think food is a good place to start.
Okay.
There are a lot of gardening programs out there, so I think we should try to maybe slip out of the traditional how to grow your carrots, but look at how to produce your good quality soil, how to do things without the chemical usage.
Okay. Why food's essential. I think most of us know that, but getting more people to consider and start producing food is a real issue, isn't it? Because seed production, food production, if the same thing happens and our food comes from all over the world and it suddenly isn't coming from all over the world, what are we going to do?
Yes, and also we're relying a little bit on at the moment, even British food is produced very largely on farms that are also very energy intense, because obviously you need tractors and a lot less staff now to do things, and also you milk cows, you've got to have a huge milking plant in order to get 100 or 500 cows through a parlour in a couple of hours. So a lot of those things are going to be in trouble too.
Yeah, I think somebody calculated it for every 1 calorie of food that we consume, it takes 10 calories of fossil fuel to go in to produce it. Yeah, and if you go back to our very earliest ancestors, when people hunted and gathered, it was the other way around, where it took 1 calorie of energy to produce 10 calories of food. You know, so
what Debbie said there is a real problem. If the farmer hasn't got any electricity and the cows need milking.
Yeah, not easy to do that by hand with the number of cows in a herd nowadays.
500 cows, that's...
Yeah, no, and it's not something that you can just phone up the local job agency and say, well, can you send me 500 milkmaids round to do the milking? Yeah, because they don't exist. You know, I mean,
buckets, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people just don't know how to do that anymore. So, I mean,
they do have generators. I know that I've been caught at 3 o'clock in the morning with the milking plant not working, and you had to put a generator on pretty quick. But nonetheless, you couldn't do that on a day by day basis.
No, I mean, going back to our food production, so if you start looking at your garden and kind of saying, well, in the event of everything falling apart, I'll just grow some veg out the back.
That's not an instant thing either, is it? Though,
no, it's going to take you.
In the ground today, you've got to wait 3 or 4 months before it comes up.
You're going to be dead by the time you harvest.
Well, this is where I think it needs thinking through, because I think a lot of people assume, oh well, if food ran out, we'd just grow our own. You think, well, how many years does it take you before you learn what's going to grow in there and how to grow it properly? Actually, your first crop, if you're lucky, you'll get slightly more energy back than you put in. The odds are, I mean, the best you're going to get first time round is a couple of shriveled up carrots and a half slug-eaten potato.
By the time you get to October, all that lot's gone. So what are you going to have in November, December, January, February?
Well, never mind in months. I mean, that's Monday out of the way. What are you going to do Tuesday? That's your annual food crop just went on 1 bowl of stew.
And not a very nice bowl of stew either.
Yeah, so I mean, actually, doing it now before everything falls apart at least gives you that head start. Because it's not good to have to learn to do something in a crisis. Far better to actually learn to do it when you've got time. Because not everyone has to learn growing food. And kind of my favorite idea was to learn to brew beer. Because you can be pretty sure in the event of everything falling apart, somebody will trade you something for a pint of beer.
But you need some corn to grow it with it or to produce it.
Well, yeah, you need a lot of wheat and you need a lot of other bits and pieces. And So.
Oh, I've got a guy in Cardiff.
By the way, grow some hops. That's a good start.
A guy in Cardiff is doing this thing where they use people's gardens to grow the hops. So basically, he goes around in the autumn and sort of collects all the hops up from people's gardens, and they take it down to the local brewery and turn it into a local craft beer. So that's a way that you can do it at the community level. Similarly, we could do the same with food, that everyone grows what works in their garden, then we pull it all together and we can actually do something with it.
You can forage foods to create a wine. Blackberry wine's pretty good.
Well, let's not do food this week. Let's do food next time, shall we? Yeah. Right. Okay. So thanks, Tim, as always, for your insightful knowledge about a whole array of subjects. And good to have you on the show here today. So thanks for that. As you, Debbie, for your participation as well. And I'm going to become less involved in this show. I'm not saying I'm buggering off just yet, but I think it's going to be great to get more guests on and for you guys to kind of take responsibility for the show. So, in a month's time, hopefully that transition will have happened and you won't have to put up with my ugly mug on here every week. So thanks, guys, and thanks for watching. If you've been watching, or this is retrospective and you've watched it in the past, thanks. In the future, sorry, thanks for watching. And we'll catch you with food next time. So cheerio for now.
Bye for now.